Donnie and Dolly, the team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
Okay, Thursday just ahead of Farhan. Delaney's OK Tiring Langley inbox. Delaney's also a sponsor of our Old Man Kane.
Yep.
We have another sponsorship idea for a company, perhaps later today.
Yep.
Or maybe tomorrow. Yeah. That's for later. This is unsigned. Please sign your text, folks. They're so creative and give us so much to talk about. We appreciate it. Rick, all those nuts and bolts in Tiger might give him superhuman strength.
You know what I mean. He had the accident. Then I read that he had some, you know how they put those rods and stuff in to fix the bones.
Yeah. Yes, rods and stuff. And when we're talking nuts and bolts, we're not talking about the snack, just so people know.
Nuts and bolts are good when you're Saturday night just on the coffee table, that stuff.
One of the great 90s commercials. Does anybody remember it? It wasn't Nuts and Bolts. It was its competitor, Bits and Bites.
Oh, Bits and Bites. That's what I was thinking
about. The cartoon guy in the hammock?
Yeah. Bits and Bites are good.
Remember that, Ryan? Of course, you were like 3.
Ryan, can you post up Bits and Bites?
We're good. Let's get to Farhan here. Farhan Lalji joins us from TSN. We'll work on that later for you, Rick, in the wake of the Canucks 5-1 victory over at Vegas.
Commercial, by the way, 2003.
Was it 2003?
Not quite the 90s.
Have you got it?
Post it up.
Well, wait. Let's finish with Farhan here. You sure it was in the 90s?
Wait.
I got see now. I got mixed messages. One says 2003.
Well, you just show
I
it.
got 2 that say 2003, and one says 98.
98.
Which would be in the 90s.
That would be, but then why is there one from 2003?
Bits and Bites. The guy holds out his hand. We'll play it later. Let's get to Farhan. He's waiting.
Yeah.
No, Farhan's gone.
I wouldn't be surprised. Farhan, we got you there. Thanks for doing this. We got him?
Happy to be here. You know, you can't have commercials in the 90s and in the 2000s, Ryan. So
Yes.
You're overly confused. It could happen where, they started in 98 and 2003. There was a second edition. These things happen, Ryan.
Yeah. Okay, so how does that happen last night, Farhan? No Besser, no Hughes against a desperate Vegas team, and they beat them by 4 goals.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch because the first period, even though they gave up the first goal, they actually played well coming out of the gate. I don't know if the current situation takes a level of pressure off. I don't know that they'll ever admit that they're done, right? But when you get into that situation, you're down to your last loss, essentially, and now you've lost 2 of your best players for the game. You might just throw your hands up at that point and say, whatever, let's just play. And, and even Bruce Boudreau says that he's seen that after the fact where, not necessarily for the reasons I'm outlining, but, where you lose guys and it just creates a level of focus and urgency for everybody else that's on the ice. But there were a number of really good performances in that game, and, it is starting with the goaltender.
Yeah, absolutely, and we mentioned that in the first segment. No Thatcher Demko, no win. He was spectacular early on. 4 points for Elias Pettersson. He's been hot lately from a production point of view, playing on the right side yesterday. Farhan, how would you describe his season?
Well, up and down, right? I mean, obviously we know what the first 22, 25 games looked like. I think he only had 10 points in the first 22, and, that's just not good enough, and part of that was just the amount of time off he had trying to get the wrist reacclimated. But we all kind of felt there was something else missing from his game that wasn't just around the wrist, right? And then, the last 25, 30 games, he's played so much better, right? And he looks like that player that we saw in his first 2 seasons. And I'm curious now to see what he's going to eventually be at full time, right? Like, what is the long-term projection for Elias Pettersson? Because for me, in those first 2 years, I thought he could be a top 5 player in the National Hockey League. And then, there came a time this year where it wasn't just a small sample size. If you take it back to last year, the whole thing didn't look good, and you wondered if he'd even be a first-line player in the league long-term, right? So I think we're seeing that. We're seeing now what he's capable of, and I just want to see another full season like we saw the first 2 years, and hopefully that happens at some point next season.
Bo Horvat, quietly, and I'm going to say quietly, career-high 28th goal last night, Farhan. There's been a lot of pockets of quietness from him this season, and all of a sudden now 14 goals last 20 games. He's not getting enough credit right now for me, Farhan.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think his 5-on-5 game is underrated because so many of the goals come on the power play, right? And I think his 5-on-5 game is really rounded out, and especially his defensive game, I think, has gotten significantly better. So I like what I'm seeing from Bo. Yeah, coming out of his bout with COVID, it didn't look good, but I think we've seen a consistency from Bo throughout his career, right? So, is there more to give, right? Like, hopefully he gets to 30 goals this year. Is there another level for him to get to? He's not a spring chicken anymore, right? Like, he's in the prime. So we'll see. But, I'm curious to see what happens this offseason when, I think for me personally, I'd be surprised if JT Miller was a Canuck in another year, like calendar year, meaning after next year's trade deadline, and what that does for Bo, good and bad, right? Because I think he's appreciated having to share the leadership role, right? I think that's been good for him, but I do think that he's also gotten so comfortable in his own skin and I think is capable of more. I do think there's another level for Bo, and I think we're seeing it right now.
Farhan, the CFL odds came out yesterday for the Grey Cup. The BC Lions are dead last. This is not good. I don't understand this. They had a ton of money to play with on the free agent market. Mike Riley's money, the whole 9 yards. Why are they dead last? This isn't good if this is the way it plays out this year.
Yeah, and I don't think it is the way it's going to play out, and that's because I'm a big believer in Nathan Rourke, and I'm not sure the odds makers are, right? So when you look at the three teams that missed the playoffs last year, Ottawa made significant additions, significant veteran additions, right? And they upgraded a quarterback, clearly, with Jeremiah Masoli. You look at Edmonton, they've still got big quarterback questions, but I think there's a lot of belief in Chris Jones' ability to do things on defense and to, be that gambler and just turn things around in his first season there, that he's what people believe in. Whereas in BC, I just think people look at the quarterback situation and look, I'd take BC's quarterback situation over Edmonton's in a minute, right? But, I think there's that Chris Jones factor that helps them kind of move past BC a little bit and up the rankings as far as the odds are concerned. But I think it really comes down to the odds makers having no idea who Nathan Rourke is. And I'm a believer, and I think they'll do better than what the odds makers project. So will they win a Grey Cup? I don't know, but I think in terms of over-under on the win total, I think there's some good value there. I'd take the Lions going over 7.5 wins.
Farhan, I know we've probably asked you this before, and we'll probably ask you it again, but you just mentioned this. Why are you a believer in Nathan Rourke?
Well, I think first and foremost, the character that he brings, right? And look, it's great to have character, but you better have talent to match. But it starts with that character piece and the work ethic and the way he was able to impress everybody around him, coaches and players, a year ago when he got not necessarily a ton of game time, but a ton of practice and preparation time while Mike Riley was dealing with his elbow injury during the first half of the season, right? And when you hear comments from a guy like Brian Burnham saying one of the reasons I signed was because of this young guy and how much I believe in him. Receivers don't sign if they don't really believe. They want to go where they can get targets and yards and touchdowns so they can cash in on their next contract, right? For guys like Lucky Whitehead and Brian Burnham to say, no, we believe in this kid, that tells you a lot. I think he's improved his velocity significantly in the last 2 years, and he combines a really good level of athleticism that I don't think we've seen yet. So I think this guy's going to take the league by storm next year because he can sling it and he can run it, and people don't appreciate. This guy was a big-time dual-threat quarterback who had a lot of yards when he was at Ohio, and I think he can translate that into the CFL really well.
Drew Lock at quarterback for the Seahawks. I'm just reading a story here about Kaepernick in the Seahawks. What's going to happen down there?
I don't know. I don't know if Pete Carroll's eventually going to pull the trigger, right? And Pete Carroll and the Seahawks have been most closest tied to Kaepernick in the last 5 years because they did bring him in at one point, and then there was a second visit scheduled, which they didn't do. I think it was in 2018 or 19, and then Pete Carroll talked about him when the Russell Wilson stuff happened, and nobody asked him the Kaepernick question. He just kind of volunteered it out there. So, I think Pete Carroll is tempted, but like a lot of other coaches, I just don't know if they want the pressure and distraction once you bring him in that comes with that. But boy, unless they can find a different solution at quarterback, I'm not buying Drew Lock. I know their personnel department says they are. I'm not, and take a chance, man. Like, bring him in for a workout. Sign him. Don't offer him anything more than the minimum. And, what's the risk? Yeah, there's some distraction, but he can play or he can't. And they've got enough people to properly evaluate that when he gets into a real team setting. So, I don't know. I'd roll the dice. Not necessarily to make him a starter, but just give him an opportunity. But, in the end, I don't know if those.
We still got you, Fran? There it is. There he is. Okay, Fran, thanks for this. Appreciate it. All the best. Talk to you next Thursday.
All right, guys. Have a good weekend.